Environmental racism is a term used to describe the disproportionate negative environmental effects on racialized communities. This form of racism occurs when communities of color are disproportionately exposed to environmental hazards, such as hazardous waste sites, air and water pollution, and other environmental hazards which can have long-term damaging effects on their health and well-being. Indigenous communities are among the most affected by environmental racism. Indigenous communities are often located near hazardous sites, such as oil pipelines, power plants, and other industrial sites, which can lead to environmental degradation and health issues. Indigenous communities are also more likely to face environmental hazards due to their lack of access to resources that would help protect them from the environmental hazards. For example, they may not have access to clean water or to medical care for illnesses caused by environmental hazards. Indigenous communities are also affected by environmental racism in other ways. For example, they may be excluded from decision-making processes regarding the development of natural resources on their land. This can lead to the exploitation of their land and resources for the benefit of non-Indigenous people and corporations. This can have a long-term negative effect on the health and well-being of Indigenous communities. Environmental racism also contributes to the marginalization of Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities are often excluded from conversations about environmental policy and the decisions that affect their lives. This lack of representation contributes to their exclusion from decision-making processes and prevents them from having a say in how their land and resources are used. There are many actions that can be taken to combat environmental racism and protect Indigenous communities. These include providing Indigenous communities with information about environmental hazards and engaging them in decision-making processes. Additionally, governments should ensure that Indigenous communities have access to resources and services that would help protect them from environmental hazards. Finally, governments should ensure that Indigenous communities are included in conversations about environmental policy and decision-making processes. Overall, environmental racism is a form of racism that disproportionately affects Indigenous communities. It is important to take action to combat environmental racism and ensure that Indigenous communities are protected from environmental hazards and that their voices are heard in conversations about environmental policy and decision-making processes.